Hi, everyone. Paul Heinz Goldberg, Heinz Business Advisors, and I'm really delighted to have once again good friend, good advisor, Greg Wright, a principal with the well-known, renowned law firm of Masuda Funai here in Chicago, Los Angeles, Schaumburg, Illinois. Greg, Happy New Year. Glad you're here.
Happy New Year, you too, Paul. Pleasure to be here.
What we like to do at the beginning of the year is simply take a couple of snapshots of what's happened, what's happening, or what is not happening as far as law and its effect on business owners. Greg, where are the areas that you would like to comment?
Sure. So I think the last time we spoke last fall, we were talking about our expectation that the fall would be a busy time for uh, sales of businesses, purchase and sales of businesses because of potential tax changes on the horizon. Um, the initial version of what we now all know to be the Build Back Better bill is still making its way through Congress. Those initial versions included some potential rises in ordinary income tax for individuals, anyone jointly with their spouse earning more than 400,000, would be subject to them, and a potential capital gains tax hike for long-term capital gains. Obviously, those are items that are of great note to individual ordinary taxpayers, and especially business owners who are looking at selling maybe in the medium term. The version of that bill that was passed by the House and the version that's being tossed around the Senate currently exclude both of those changes. So a little less direct impact. We still saw a lot of activity at the end of last year because this is still an open question. But the current bill, as it sits, still does include some tax provisions of note to middle market companies and their owners. So, for example, businesses that are owned through a pass-through entity may be subject going forward to an additional tax surcharge of about 3.5% to 4%. Really high income earners in the $10–25 million range would still see a tax hike of a couple percent on those high amounts. There are some limitations potentially coming down the pike for IRA contributions for very high earners, and those corporate buybacks that really benefited a lot of investors after the last tax cut change. Those may be subject to a 1% tax going forward too. Now, there's good stuff with this potentially too. I mean, those of us in Illinois, a lot of us have been tagged with that limitation on deduction of your state and local tax. There's discussion of raising that from 10,000 to something much larger. Would be a relief to a lot of Illinois residents, especially in the northeastern part of the state. Depending on your demographic and your personal situation, maybe the child tax credit extension would be good for you too. But so the Senate's still looking at this. Everyone has seen that Senator Manchin's a conservative Democrat out of West Virginia, has sort of at least temporarily put his foot down on this and is looking to see some changes if he's able to support it at all. But his objections seem to be, at least publicly, primarily to the various areas of social spending, rather than to some of the tax issues we just discussed. So it is still possible that as this bill gets tossed around and negotiated, we still have a few months before everyone goes home to run for re-election. We could see a bill here passed, maybe a slimmed down version of that Build Back Better bill that includes these tax changes. And if you own your business through a pass-through entity, or if you're a particular high earner, you may be impacted. If your tax enforcement may go up simply because you've got a federal revenue need, a tax agency that's hungry for revenue and wants to look more closely at your returns. A federal relief program could come in that affects small businesses. And these are just all things to take into account. If you own a small, medium-sized enterprise and you're trying to decide sort of the time frame on which you seek to divest your investment.
It's likely that at the time they do pass tax legislation into law, it would be retroactive to the 1st of 2022, wouldn't it?
It could be, yes. So for example, it's again stripped out of the bill at this stage, but that capital gains rise that was originally contemplated, that was written in to be retroactive to last September. If it had passed last year, those ordinary tax bracket rises, and they were looking at recreating a tax bracket just south of 40%. That would have applied to 2021 income potentially. And so it is difficult since we don't really know, with a bill that's still very fluid, if there is one at all to be passed, what sort of tax changes we will see and when they would be effective. So it could be retroactive to this year. It could provide some relief and only apply to tax years going forward. But in any event, something to keep your eye on, because no one likes a surprise when they're operating a business or when they're looking to sell it.
We're finding that at times, business owners with uncertainties like the impact of a virus or the impact of inflation, the impact of lots of other things that are far beyond the business owner's control, are causing them to say, I need to be a little more prepared than I have been in the past. And that's good.
Yes.
Currently, as we sit here in January of 2022, the capital gains federal level rate is 20%, is it not?
That is, yes.
The state level is 5%, is it not? Where do you believe, from a general personal consensus, where would it possibly be going? So that the business owner could get some idea of how to prepare in the event they want to sell or be taxed on a merger or equivalent.
Sure. So I think, again, the capital gains rate almost did go up 5% had those initial drafts of the House bill made it to the Senate, and become law. That was the original Biden tax proposal. The fact that that's been stripped out and the Senate Finance Committee has looked at the bill and has not added it back, I think we're likely to see the capital gains rate federally stay at the 20% rate, at least for now. Although again, the negotiations remain open.
Yeah.
At the state level, that's an interesting question. Obviously, Governor Pritzker last year had a flat tax proposal, a graduated tax proposal rather, that he put before voters, which was rejected.
Yes.
As a result of that, we have a state that's just gone through, as all states have, a lot of COVID spending and is hungry for revenue. So the one source right now that the state has gone back to is reinstating the Illinois franchise tax, which was set to basically sunset over the next couple of years. That now remains in place. It's a tax on paid-in capital by companies that are qualified or organized in Illinois. Capital gains could go up. I haven't heard any real local chatter about it, but I wouldn't be surprised by any tax rise proposal coming out of Springfield, because ultimately there's a lot of spending down there because of what we've gone through the last few years, and I need to balance the books.
On the one hand, recently they indicated that inflation was in the current month, or at least December, 7%, which for most of us who have got more than 30 years in business is a whopping amount and a terribly large increase.
Extraordinary, yes.
In your general opinion, is this short-lived based on the supply chain pressures, or are we in a circumstance now? You've got people who are bound by virus. You have people who are in desperate need to be employed by corporations. There's a shortage of people. People seem to be trending different things. How long do you expect an inflationary rate at that level to be in effect? Is it unknown, or is it likely to peak down from where it's at now?
That is difficult to say. I mean, we haven't seen inflation as a serious policy issue in this country since probably the early part of the 1980s. And this is just a very high level. That said, we're living through very extraordinary times, and the policy solutions that were used to fight COVID and the economic crisis that accompanied it required a lot of government spending, and effectively the pumping into the economy a lot of money that wasn't necessarily tied to productive work at the time. It was simply trying to prop up an economy so that we could get through this together. obviously we're discussing, potential large spending bill that may or may not pass either piecemeal or in a different form.
The
And that
infrastructure
could-
bill,
The infrastructure bill as well, yes, that's a good
Yes.
point. And the infrastructure bill will pump a lot of government money into the economy. However, that will also accompany actual work on projects throughout the country, shovel-ready projects throughout the country. So it's hard to say really. The first part of the attack against COVID, I suppose, where checks were being cut in a number of different places and businesses were being sustained through PPP and similar loans. That stage seems to be more or less behind us, and you would expect that to have an inflationary effect. The moves that are coming about now, it's difficult to say. We're just hopeful that number starts to decline. If we start to return to a more normally balanced economy, it's harder to hide price rises for your customers than it is in an unusual time. So maybe that will assist too. So I'm hopeful, but not making any firm predictions.
certainly.
Yeah.
Over here, we have the prime rate, borrowing rate, which is approximately what now, in the 3% category,
I believe it's
3.2% category?
in that area, yes. Historically low still. I mean, in the broader sense.
So for the business owner who's usually uses the year end or the beginning of the year as an assessment time, it's sort of like a pontification time to look from 30,000 feet at his business, her business, what are we going to do with it? So you've got inexpensive money, you have high inflation with a determination rate, which is anybody's guess, and you have a relatively predictable range, at least at the state level, if not the federal level, of capital gains. Is there any legislation that is geared toward energizing the purchase of equipment for manufacturers, or any relief or any encouragement for manufacturers, distributors, or service businesses to plow back into their business for investment? Anything at all that you've seen?
I haven't seen anything on the scale of what was done in connection with the last Tax Cut Act back in 2017, if I remember correctly, where there was an opportunity to sort of adjust the way in which capital investments were amortized, and that really sort of turbocharged manufacturing investment at that
Right.
time. Goodness, we could use that now. And there were folks who said at the time that maybe the portion of the area in the economic cycle was not the right time for some of the prime pumping measures that were included there. So we'll see, but I haven't seen anything quite at that targeted quite in that way. Obviously, the infrastructure bill, which you mentioned before, we'll probably get a lot of people working and a lot of people moving, and you may see enterprises that are involved in infrastructure making needed investments in order to meet those contractual requirements. But in the manufacturing capacity, I think the market may drive it.
Unemployment is very, very low at this particular time.
Mhm.
You're paying essentially people, or have, to stay home. And there are great amounts of jobs open.
Mhm.
A lot of people are peeling back on the services or products that they offer, which is causing vacancies on shelves, causing supply and demand issues, which is the other shoe dropping in my mind. Is curious, are there any new international trade restrictions or penalties by importing or exporting, certainly by importing from anything in the international trade area that should be noted at this particular time?
Well, I mean, as it affects the United States, certainly, we've had backups at a number of our ports, specifically, in the southwestern corner of the country, Long Beach
Yes.
and Los Angeles had flotillas of container ships floating off the coast,
Yeah.
and just unable to unload. That I think has been alleviated to some degree because of the attention that was paid to it with the, the coming of the Christmas
Yes.
holiday, and the new businesses really had to get back in the black after a number of soft economic cycles, soft economic years rather. And the attention that the Biden administration put on getting those ports to run 24 hours and getting containers in and out. This is an international issue, though. During the short period in which some international travel seemed like a good idea back in October, I was in the United Kingdom, and they were having similar difficulties there. Some of it blamed on knockoff effects of Brexit, but some of it indicating that Felixstowe and Dover and their other major ports were backed up because of a shortage of truck drivers, many of whom had returned to the continent during the COVID crisis after Brexit. They're having the same problems with employment, filling various employment positions rather as we are here in the United States. And just generally, the supply chain is a bit out of kilter because of long dry spells of demand followed by spells of a very high demand. And so when you put all of that together, with all of the ordinary difficulties that we have, periods of shutdown throughout the year, now COVID peaking in different areas and then subsiding, it just makes it very difficult to run a highly efficient supply chain as it once was, as we experienced it. So, I think obviously we all see this, the arguments, the trade wars that have gone on, between the United States and China.
Yes.
You see what's going on between the United Kingdom and the EU in the wake of Brexit. But I think a lot of the supply chain difficulties remain knockoff effects of an economy that was put into hibernation and restarted, and we're all just trying to find the new normal.
For this session, the business owner should get advice from his attorney, his accountant on a regular basis because of the flux and moving of things, especially relative to taxes, interest rates, penalties, and the like.
Mhm.
It's always a pleasure to have you here, Greg, and we look forward to a mid-year time or before when things may change more dramatically or events occur that should be explained to the business owner. We look forward to having you come back again.
Well, change seems to be the one constant, Paul, so I look forward to discussing it with you.
Always a pleasure.
Likewise.
And to you, our loyal listeners, thank you for tuning in. We're trying to keep our thumb on things that are quickly changing or adversely changing insofar as the business owner is concerned. Thank you for taking the time to listen. We look forward to talking with you again about things that are really important to you and your business. I'm Paul Heinze for Greg Wright of Masuda Funai Law Firm. Thanks for tuning in. Bye now.